Not in a dramatic way, not as a new personality, more like a quiet internal shift. A sense that life is meant to feel different than it does right now. You may have felt it, that subtle expectation that one day something will click, that things will finally settle, that the mind will stop pulling in so many directions. And yet, it hasn't happened. You hear people talk about awareness, about alignment, about awakening. The words sound familiar. They make sense. You understand the concepts. But inside, there's a quiet question that never fully goes away. If any of this were real, wouldn't I feel different by now? This question doesn't mean you're failing. It doesn't mean you're behind. It doesn't mean you're missing something. It means you've been searching in the place you were taught to look. Almost everyone is. Most people assume this shift happens through thinking, through better understanding, through collecting enough insight, through finding the right explanation. So they study themselves, they analyze patterns, they watch their thoughts, they try to improve their mindset. And for a while, this feels responsible. It feels like growth. It feels like progress. But slowly, something becomes obvious. The more you try to figure yourself out, the heavier everything feels. Not lighter, not calmer, heavier. This is the first clue. Because the shift people are looking for does not arrive the way effort arrives. It doesn't appear because you finally think correctly. It doesn't happen because you reach the perfect conclusion. It begins when something stops, not when something is added. Most people are taught that growth means accumulation. More insight, more discipline, more awareness, more control. But the shift is subtractive. It happens through loss. Not loss of anything important, loss of interference, loss of internal friction, loss of constant self-management. The problem is, the mind cannot track subtraction. The mind only notices activity. So when activity decreases, the mind labels it as nothing, stuck, empty, broken. When in reality, something precise is occurring, something reorganizing beneath thought, something most people interrupt without realizing it. Because when effort begins to soften, discomfort often appears, and discomfort is interpreted as danger, so effort returns. Control returns, trying resumes. And the shift stays out of reach, not because you did something wrong, but because trying itself is the interruption. This is difficult to accept, because trying feels responsible. Trying feels mature. Trying feels like the only reasonable option. But there is a quiet truth underneath all of this. Much of what you call effort was never about improvement. It was about regulation. At some point in your life, probably early, staying mentally active felt safer than being still. Thinking felt safer than feeling. Doing felt safer than pausing. So your system adapted. When discomfort arose, you moved, you planned, you analyzed, you fixed. Not because anyone told you to, because it worked. It reduced sensation. It created a sense of control. It gave orientation. And anything that reduces discomfort gets remembered. Not intellectually, biologically. Over time, this became automatic. You didn't choose to become effort-based. You became effort-based because it helped you function. So when someone tells you to just let go, your system doesn't hear freedom. It hears threat. Because letting go means removing the strategy that has been keeping things manageable. This is why letting go feels uncomfortable. Not because it's wrong, not because it's dangerous, but because it removes a coping mechanism. And the moment a coping mechanism disappears, the sensation it was covering becomes visible. Not worse, not new, visible. This distinction matters, because most people believe letting go creates discomfort. It doesn't. Letting go reveals what effort was hiding, which means the discomfort you feel when you stop trying is not a sign to go back. It is a sign that you are finally close enough to feel what has been underneath. This is where people usually turn away. They say, "I tried stopping. It made me anxious. So trying must be necessary." But what if trying was never solving anxiety, only masking it? What if effort was functioning like noise? Not healing, not resolving, just drowning out sensation. When noise stops, the room doesn't become dangerous. It becomes audible, and audible feels intense when you're not used to listening. So the next layer of this shift is not about forcing calm. It's not about positive thinking. It's not about replacing thoughts. It's about learning a new relationship with sensation. Because awareness alone is not enough. You can be aware of a pattern and still be trapped inside it. You can recognize a thought and still feel your body react. You can understand where a behavior came from and still repeat it. This confuses people. They think insight should fix things, but insight is information. Change requires safety. The nervous system does not reorganize because you understand something. It reorganizes when it no longer feels under threat, which means the real shift does not start in thought. It starts in the body, as a subtle softening, a small release, a slight reduction in bracing. No fireworks, no announcement, just a quieter relationship with sensation. And that relationship cannot be forced, because forcing is the opposite of safety. The moment you try to relax, the system senses pressure. The moment you try to be calm, the system senses expectation. The moment you try to let go, the system senses control. So paradoxically, the shift begins when you stop trying to make it begin. Not as a technique, not as a strategy, but as a noticing. Noticing the urge to interfere, noticing the impulse to fix, noticing the reflex to manage, and not immediately obeying it, not suppressing it, not arguing with it, simply not following it. That pause, that tiny space between impulse and action, is the doorway. At first, that space feels uncomfortable. The mind gets louder. Thoughts speed up. Restlessness appears. A subtle panic arises. This is the phase almost everyone misreads. They think they broke something. They didn't. They removed the distraction. So sensation stepped forward. That sensation is not your enemy. It is unprocessed energy. Old tension, stored activation, the body saying, here is what has been waiting, and if you do not run, if you do not fix, if you do not re-engage effort, something surprising happens. The sensation changes, not because you forced it, because sensations naturally move when they are allowed. This is regulation, not imposed, not engineered, allowed. And this is what the nervous system has always known how to do. It simply hasn't been given space because effort kept filling every gap. So the early stage of the shift does not feel like peace. It feels like exposure, and exposure feels scary until you see nothing bad is happening. You are breathing, you are alive, you are present, and the sensation is moving. That experience teaches the system something new, not conceptually, physically. That discomfort does not equal danger. That sensation does not require action, that nothing collapses when you do not interfere. And that lesson changes everything. Because once the body learns this, the mind begins to lose its emergency tone. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer arrive as commands. They arrive as suggestions. You can listen or not. You can respond or not. This is the beginning of real freedom, not freedom from thoughts, freedom from compulsion. From here, another layer begins to loosen. The identity built around being the one who manages everything. And that is where the deeper shift starts. When the identity built around managing everything begins to loosen, it doesn't announce itself. There's no moment where you suddenly realize, oh, I'm not that person anymore. Instead, you notice small absences. You don't jump to fix things as quickly. You don't feel the same urgency to explain yourself. You don't immediately reach for mental control when something feels uncertain. At first, this feels strange, almost irresponsible, because for a long time, being responsible meant staying mentally engaged. It meant thinking ahead, planning, monitoring, anticipating problems. So when those habits soften, the mind starts asking quiet questions. Who am I if I'm not constantly managing? What happens if I'm not on top of everything? Am I becoming lazy? Am I losing my edge? These questions don't come from truth. They come from identity protection. Because much of your sense of self was built around effort. You were the thinker, the organizer, the one who stayed prepared, the one who held things together. That role had value. It earned approval. It earned safety. It earned belonging. So when it begins to dissolve, the system interprets it as risk. Not because something bad is happening, but because something familiar is ending. And the nervous system prefers familiar pain to unfamiliar peace. This is why people often reattach to struggle right here. They unconsciously recreate problems. They start overthinking again. They find something new to fix. Not because anything is wrong, but because struggle feels like home. It gives orientation. It tells you who you are. Without it, there's space. And space feels undefined. Undefined feels unsafe to a mind trained in structure. So the mind tries to fill the space. It suggests goals. It suggests improvements. It suggests new versions of yourself. It says, okay, if we're not forcing in that way anymore, let's at least force in a better way. But subtle forcing is still forcing. Gentle control is still control. And control, no matter how refined, still communicates danger to the nervous system. So the system doesn't fully settle. It hovers, it waits, it stays half-braced. This is why many people feel like they're almost there for years. They've let go of obvious force, but they're still supervising themselves, still monitoring their state, still checking if they're aligned, still adjusting their inner experience. Which means effort hasn't truly ended. It has only become quieter. The shift deepens when even this subtle supervision starts to be noticed. Not judged, not attacked, not corrected, noticed. You begin to see how often the mind tries to manage your inner world. Not with panic, not with intensity, but with quiet suggestions. Maybe you should think about this. Maybe you should work on that. Maybe you should optimize this feeling. Maybe you should figure out what this means. These thoughts sound reasonable, helpful, responsible, but underneath them is the same assumption. Something inside you needs fixing. Something needs managing. Something isn't okay yet. And the body hears that assumption even when the words sound kind. So a new layer of letting go begins. Not letting go of goals, not letting go of responsibilities, letting go of the belief that your inner state must be controlled for you to be okay. This is subtle, because we've been trained to believe self-control equals maturity. But self-control and self-regulation are not the same thing. Self-control is top-down, mind over body. Self-regulation is bottom-up, body settling, mind following. Most people have been practicing self-control their entire lives. Very few have experienced true regulation, because regulation cannot be forced. It happens when resistance ends. This is where another misunderstanding often appears. People think regulation means feeling calm, but calm is an outcome. Regulation is a process. It looks like sensation moving through the body without being interrupted. Tension rising, tension falling, emotion appearing, emotion passing, no story layered on top, no meaning assigned, no future projected, just experience completing itself. At first, this feels uncomfortable, because you're not used to letting experiences complete. You're used to stepping in, distracting, fixing, analyzing. So staying present with sensation feels like doing nothing, and doing nothing feels wrong. But doing nothing is not what's happening. Something precise is happening. The body is finishing what it started. For years, decades, the system has been holding incomplete emotional loops. Not because you did anything wrong, but because survival required interruption. You had to move on. You had to function. You had to keep going. So experiences got paused internally. Now, when effort softens, those paused experiences resume. Not as memories, not as stories, as sensations. Tightness, warmth, pressure, vibration, heaviness. This can feel strange, even unsettling. But it's not pathology. It's integration. The system clearing old charge. This is why people sometimes feel waves of emotion during the shift, not tied to anything specific, not about the present moment, just energy moving. And again, most people misinterpret this. They think something is wrong, they think they're regressing, they think they're opening wounds. But nothing is being reopened, nothing is being created, things are being completed. This is what the body does when it feels safe enough, which means the presence of sensation is not a sign of failure, it's a sign of increased safety. Because only in safety does the system release. Danger causes tightening. Safety allows unwinding. So if you notice more sensation, more awareness of your body, more emotional movement, it doesn't mean you're going backward. It means you've stopped suppressing. This is one of the most important reframes. Because without it, people turn back. They return to effort to stop the sensations, which recreates the original pattern. So the shift deepens when you stop trying to feel better. Not in a hopeless way, not in a resigned way, in a neutral way. You stop making your inner state a project. You stop measuring how you feel. You stop checking if you're calm enough. You stop evaluating your progress. And something unexpected happens. The less you monitor your state, the more stable it becomes. Not perfectly stable, naturally stable, like a body finding its balance when you stop wobbling. This doesn't produce constant peace. It produces baseline steadiness, a quiet okayness, not excitement, not bliss, okayness. And okayness is deeply underrated because okayness is sustainable. Okayness doesn't require maintenance. Okayness doesn't depend on circumstances. It's simply the absence of internal war. This is where another identity begins to loosen. The identity of someone who is working on themselves. For a long time, self-work gave meaning. It gave direction. It gave a sense of purpose. So when self-work starts to fall away, there can be a strange emptiness. Not the void we talked about earlier, a practical emptiness. What do I do now? Who am I if I'm not fixing myself? This question can feel surprisingly heavy, because self-improvement wasn't just an activity. It became a personality. It became how you related to yourself, always in process, always becoming, always upgrading. Letting go of that identity can feel like losing motivation. But what's actually happening is this. You're no longer driven by the belief that something is wrong with you. And without that belief, the engine of self-improvement loses fuel. Not because growth stops, but because growth no longer needs self-criticism. This is a radical shift. Growth without self-rejection. Learning without self-disappointment. Movement without self-pressure. Most people have never experienced this, so when it starts, they panic. They think they're becoming complacent. They think they're losing ambition. But look closely. Are you actually doing less, or are you doing fewer unnecessary things? Are you actually less capable, or are you simply no longer driven by fear? There's a big difference. Fear-driven productivity is noisy. Regulated productivity is quiet. Fear-driven productivity feels urgent. Regulated productivity feels simple. You still act. You still respond. You still engage with life, but you don't need inner violence to do it. This is where the quality of action changes. Instead of acting to escape discomfort, you act because something makes sense. Instead of pushing yourself forward, you move when there's a natural pull. Instead of forcing momentum, you follow timing. This is not passive, it's responsive. And responsive action often looks slower on the outside, but it's cleaner, more precise, less scattered. Which leads to another subtle change. You start trusting pauses. Before, pauses felt like danger, like stagnation, like wasted time. Now, pauses feel informative. You notice that clarity often appears after you stop pushing, that solutions surface when you're not hunting them. That insight arrives when you're relaxed, not when you're straining. This teaches the system a new association. Pausing does not equal falling behind. Pausing allows reorganization, and reorganization creates coherence. This is important, because coherence is what people often mistake for manifestation power. But coherence is simply internal alignment. When your thoughts, emotions, and nervous system are not fighting each other. When there is no internal tug of war, life feels smoother, not because reality is obeying you, but because you're no longer resisting it. This doesn't mean everything goes your way. It means you stop turning friction into suffering. You stop adding a second layer of struggle on top of life. And because you're not wasting energy on inner conflict, you have more available energy for actual living. Not self-managing, not self-correcting. Living. This is where the shift becomes practical, not philosophical, not conceptual. You notice it in ordinary moments. You spill something and don't spiral. You get unexpected news and don't catastrophize. You make a mistake and don't attack yourself. These are small things, but they are enormous. Because they indicate that your nervous system is no longer interpreting everyday life as a threat. And that sets the stage for the next layer. Because once the system no longer feels under constant threat, another behavior begins to fade. The need to predict the future. The need to mentally rehearse every outcome. The need to stay one step ahead of uncertainty. And that is where the deeper surrender begins. As the need to predict the future begins to soften, something very unfamiliar appears. Not excitement, not relief, not certainty, not confidence, not even calm, not knowing. And not knowing is one of the most misunderstood states a human can experience. Because from a survival perspective, not knowing has been labeled as dangerous. If you don't know what's coming, you can't prepare. If you can't prepare, you can't protect yourself. So the mind learned early. Always think ahead, always simulate outcomes, always run scenarios, always stay one step ahead of reality. For many people, this became automatic, not as a conscious strategy, as a background process, a constant low-level future scanning. Most don't even realize they're doing it, they just experience it as thinking. But when regulation stabilizes, this background scanning begins to quiet. And that quiet can feel deeply unsettling at first, because the mind says, wait, why aren't we planning? Why aren't we preparing? Why aren't we worried? What did we miss? This doesn't feel like peace. It feels like vulnerability, like walking without armor. And that's accurate. But it's not dangerous vulnerability. It's unarmored presence. There's a difference. Armor is created in response to perceived threat. Presence exists when threat is no longer assumed. So what's dissolving here isn't intelligence. It isn't awareness. It isn't responsibility. It's the assumption that danger is constant. This is subtle, because many people believe their overthinking is what keeps them safe. They say, if I didn't think ahead, I'd fall apart. If I didn't worry, bad things would happen. If I didn't prepare, I'd fail. But look closely. Has your overthinking actually prevented the worst moments of your life? Or has it simply made the waiting more painful? Most major events were not prevented by rumination. They were handled when they arrived, in real time. With capacities you already had, the system begins to remember this, not as a belief, as an embodied knowing. You start to sense. When something needs my attention, I notice. When something needs action, I respond. I don't need to live in rehearsal mode. This is a huge recalibration, because it moves safety from prediction to responsiveness. Instead of, I'm safe because I can foresee everything, it becomes, I'm safe because I can meet what arises. That is a much deeper form of safety. But the transition between these two can feel like free fall, because prediction created an illusion of ground, even though it never truly guaranteed anything. So when that illusion fades, the mind says, what am I standing on? The answer is uncomfortable. Nothing conceptual. You're standing on aliveness itself, on the organism's capacity to adapt, on intelligence that doesn't live in thought. That can feel abstract at first, but you begin to notice it in small moments. Someone says something unexpected. You respond. You didn't pre-plan it, but your response is fine. A problem appears. You don't know immediately what to do. But later, an idea arises. Not from force, not from panic, from space. You start to trust this sequence, not because you decide to, because you witness it repeatedly. Trust grows through evidence, not affirmations, not declarations, experience. And this is important. This trust does not feel heroic. It does not feel like bold faith. It feels ordinary, almost boring, like, oh, I can handle things when they happen. That's it. No fireworks, no identity upgrade. Just a quiet internal shift. And because it's quiet, many people overlook it. They're waiting for confidence. But what arrives is something more stable than confidence. Reliability. You become reliable to yourself. You trust your own responsiveness, which is very different from trusting specific outcomes. Most people try to trust that things will go well. That's fragile, because outcomes are unpredictable. But trusting your capacity to respond, that's durable. That doesn't depend on circumstances. This is where future orientation softens, not because you don't care about the future, not because you don't plan at all, but because planning is no longer fueled by fear. You may still make lists, you may still set reminders, you may still think ahead when appropriate, but it's situational, not constant. There's a big difference between using the mind when needed and living inside the mind all day. The shift is moving from residence to tool. The mind becomes something you use, not somewhere you live. This is one of the clearest markers of the mental shift. Thoughts still occur, but they don't form the center of gravity anymore. Awareness becomes the center, not in a mystical way, in a practical way. You're more aware of sensation, more aware of tone, more aware of subtle shifts, less absorbed in internal commentary. This doesn't make you blank. It makes you available. Available to notice what's actually happening, instead of narrating it endlessly. And with this availability, something else changes: your relationship to choice. Before, choice felt heavy. Every decision carried weight, because it felt like it determined your future. Choose wrong and everything collapses. That's how it felt. Now, choice feels lighter. Not because choices don't matter, but because you're no longer projecting your entire worth onto outcomes. You choose, you act, you adjust, you learn, you move again. Life becomes iterative, not a single pass/fail exam. This removes enormous pressure, and when pressure leaves choice, clarity increases. Not intellectual clarity, somatic clarity. You sense. This feels right, this feels off, this feels heavy, this feels light. You don't always know why, you don't need to. The body knows before the mind constructs explanations. This is intuition, not mystical, not supernatural. Interoception, sensitivity to internal signals, which were always there, but drowned out by noise. Effort made intuition unnecessary, because if you're forcing, you don't need to listen. Now that forcing is fading, listening becomes natural again, and listening changes how you move through life. You stop overriding yourself as often. You stop pushing through subtle resistance. You start respecting internal signals, not as commandments, as information. This doesn't make you fragile. It makes you precise. You conserve energy. You invest it where there's resonance, not where there's obligation driven by fear. This precision can look like doing less, but what you're actually doing is less waste, less leakage, less self-sabotage disguised as productivity. Which brings up another important shift: your relationship to desire. Before, desire was tied to lack. I want this because I don't have it. I need this to feel okay. I'll be okay once I get there. Desire was future-oriented relief-seeking. Now, desire begins to feel different. You still want things, you still have preferences, you still imagine possibilities. But wanting is no longer fused with desperation. There's no inner leaning, no gripping, no, this must happen or else. Desire becomes more like curiosity, interest, exploration. What would it be like if this happened? Not, I need this to happen. This is subtle but massive. Because tension is what distorts desire. Tension makes desire heavy. When tension leaves, desire becomes light. And light desire doesn't consume mental bandwidth. It doesn't occupy you all day. It doesn't hijack your mood. It doesn't dictate your self-worth. It simply exists. And when desire is light, action becomes playful rather than compulsory. You try things, you explore, you move toward what interests you. But your nervous system isn't staked on success, which paradoxically makes success more likely. Because fear-based tension was interfering with timing, perception, and responsiveness. Again, nothing mystical, purely physiological. A regulated system sees more options. A braced system sees only threats and escapes. So, as regulation deepens, perception widens. You notice opportunities you previously overlooked. You notice people, you notice openings, you notice subtle invitations. Not because the universe changed, because your filtering system changed. Less threat filtering, more possibility filtering. This is often what people describe as, life feels more cooperative. But cooperation isn't imposed from outside. It's experienced because internal resistance has decreased, which leads to a surprising realization. Manifestation, as people usually talk about it, becomes less interesting. Not because it doesn't happen, but because it's no longer the center. Outcomes still occur. Synchronicities still occur. Opportunities still arise. But you're not watching reality like a scoreboard anymore. You're participating rather than monitoring. This is a huge difference. Monitoring creates tension. Participation creates flow. Flow is not a constant state. It's a byproduct of reduced self-interference, which is exactly what's happening here. You're interfering less. Not because you're disciplined, not because you're trying, because you see more clearly that interference was never helping. It was trying to help, but it wasn't helping. Seeing that dissolves it. No battle required. And as interference drops, Another layer begins to fade. The need to explain yourself. Internally. Externally. You don't narrate your experience as much. You don't build as many stories about who you are. You don't need to constantly define your identity. This can feel empty at first, but it's not emptiness. It's unlabeled presence. Before, identity was constantly being constructed. I am this kind of person. I'm becoming that kind of person. I'm working on this. I struggle with that. Now, identity becomes less solid. Not in a dissociative way, in a flexible way. You're less invested in a fixed self-image, which means you're less fragile, because there's less to defend. You don't collapse when you act out of character. You don't panic when you change. You don't cling to narratives about who you must be. You're more fluid, and fluid systems adapt. Rigid systems break. This fluidity is another form of safety, not safety through control, safety through adaptability, which brings us to the next layer. Because as adaptability increases, you begin to notice that stress itself has changed, not disappeared. Changed. Stress still appears. Deadlines still exist. Unexpected messages still arrive. Problems still show up. Life does not turn gentle. What changes is not the presence of stress. What changes is its authority. Before, stress meant emergency. Stress meant something is wrong. Stress meant drop everything and fix. The body reacted first. The mind followed with stories. Now stress registers, but it does not seize the system. You feel activation, but it doesn't escalate into collapse. You notice tightening, and it doesn't automatically turn into catastrophe. This is one of the clearest signs of regulation. Not that you never feel stress, but that stress moves through instead of taking over. Before, stress hijacked identity. I'm stressed became who you were in that moment. Now, stress is a sensation, energy moving, information, not a verdict. This distinction changes everything, because when stress is information, you can respond. When stress is a verdict, you can only react. Reaction is fast, narrow, compulsive. Response is slower, wider, selective. You still act, you still solve, you still address what needs attention, but you don't collapse into urgency. There is a pause, even if it's half a second. That pause is new. That pause is power. Not power over others. Not power to control outcomes. Power to not be yanked around internally. Inside that pause, choice lives. And choice without panic feels very different than choice under threat. Under threat, choices feel heavy. Every option feels dangerous. When regulated, choices feel workable. Not perfect. Not guaranteed. Workable. You begin to trust workable, not flawless, not ideal. Workable is enough. This softens perfectionism at its root. Perfectionism was never about high standards. It was about fear of consequences, fear of collapse, fear of unworthiness. When fear decreases, perfectionism weakens. Not because you lower your standards, but because standards are no longer tied to survival. You can care, without your nervous system acting like everything is life or death. This creates a new relationship to mistakes. Mistakes still happen, but they don't threaten your identity. They don't define you. They don't spiral into shame narratives. They become data, feedback, something to adjust, not something to punish. Punishment was always a misguided attempt at control. If I make myself feel bad enough, I won't do it again. But shame never produced wisdom. It produced contraction. Now, contraction is less tolerated, not because you forbid it, because it feels uncomfortable in a new way, like wearing a tight shoe after walking barefoot. You can still put it on, but you notice the discomfort immediately, and you're less willing to stay there. This is how change stabilizes, not through willpower, through preference. Your system begins to prefer openness, prefer softness, prefer simplicity, not as ideals, as sensations. And because preference is embodied, you don't have to remind yourself. You drift toward what feels coherent, which leads to another important shift. Your relationship to time changes. Before, time felt scarce. There was always something behind, something ahead, something overdue. Time felt like pressure. Now, time feels more neutral. Not infinite, not meaningless. Neutral. Moments feel more complete, not because they're perfect, but because you're not constantly projecting yourself elsewhere. When you're washing your hands, you're washing your hands. When you're listening, you're listening. When you're walking, you're walking. This doesn't mean you're hyper-present. It means you're less absent, less split, less half here, half somewhere else. This increases a subtle form of satisfaction, not happiness. Satisfaction, a sense of enoughness, not I have everything I want. More like, this moment isn't lacking something fundamental. That's huge, because the belief that moments are lacking is what drove endless seeking. When moments stop feeling fundamentally lacking, seeking relaxes. Not curiosity, not exploration. Compulsive seeking, the kind that says, there's something wrong right now. Fix it. Get somewhere else. This quiets. And when compulsive seeking quiets, another layer appears. Gratitude, not forced gratitude. Not lists, not positive reframing. Organic appreciation. Small things start to register. Warm water, a chair, a breath, a stretch, a neutral body moment. Not dramatic, not sentimental, simple. This is not because you trained gratitude. It's because the nervous system is no longer braced. When you're not braced, sensory input is more available. You actually feel your life, instead of mentally hovering above it. This embodiment is a core part of the shift. But embodiment is often misunderstood. People think it means intense body awareness or constant scanning. It doesn't. It means you're inhabiting your experience rather than narrating it. Less commentary, more direct sensing. This reduces mental noise, not by silencing thoughts, by making thoughts less central, which frees up bandwidth. You may notice that you're less mentally tired, even if your schedule hasn't changed, because much of your previous fatigue came from internal friction. Arguing with yourself, second-guessing, monitoring, evaluating, correcting. That consumes enormous energy. As that diminishes, you feel lighter. Not euphoric, lighter, more spacious, less dense. This can feel unfamiliar, because density became normal. So at first, lightness can feel strange, almost like something is missing. But nothing essential is missing. What's missing is constant tension. And tension had been mistaken for aliveness. Now aliveness feels quieter, but more real. This is an important reorientation. Before, intensity equaled real. Now, presence equals real. Which brings us to a subtle but crucial shift. Your sense of self becomes less tied to mental activity. Before, you might have unconsciously equated, I am my thoughts. I am my personality. I am my story. Now there's more space between awareness and content. You still have a personality. You still have preferences. You still have history. But you're less collapsed into them. They're experienced as phenomena, not definitions. This doesn't make you detached. It makes you less trapped. You can enjoy aspects of yourself without being imprisoned by them. You can notice patterns without making them identity. This makes growth gentler, not urgent, not dramatic, gradual, natural, because you're not trying to become someone else. You're allowing patterns to update as conditions change. And conditions have changed. The system is safer. Safer systems reorganize toward health. That's a biological principle, not a spiritual belief. This is why forcing was never necessary. Forcing was compensating for lack of safety. When safety increases, organisms move toward coherence automatically, which leads to another important realization. You don't need to constantly work on yourself anymore. Not because you're perfect, not because there's nothing to learn, but because self-work was based on an assumption. Something is fundamentally wrong. That assumption is dissolving. Now, learning feels like curiosity, not repair. Growth feels like exploration, not fixing. You still read, you still watch, you still listen, but with a different energy, not desperate, not hungry, not trying to become okay, just interested. And interest is light. Which brings us to another subtle shift. You stop measuring yourself as much. Before, you were constantly taking internal measurements. Am I progressing? Am I regressing? Am I aligned? Am I healed? Am I doing this right? Now, those questions appear less frequently, and when they appear, they don't hook as strongly. Because you're no longer orienting around a scoreboard. Life is no longer a performance review. It's an experience. This reduces comparison. Not because you morally reject comparison, because comparison loses relevance. Other people's paths don't say much about yours. Their timing doesn't say much about your timing. You can appreciate others without using them as measuring sticks. This frees up a lot of mental space, which then reveals another layer, a quieter kind of confidence. Not bravado, not certainty, not I know who I am. More like I can be with not knowing who I am. And that's okay. This is a deep form of security. Identity becomes flexible, situation responsive, not rigid. You don't need a fixed self-concept to function. You function from presence. This is very different from how most people are taught to operate, but it's closer to how children operate. Before identity solidifies, before heavy self-concept, which is why this shift can feel like remembering something old, not learning something new. You're returning to a simpler mode of being. Not simplistic, simple. Less layers, less commentary, less self-surveillance, more directness, more immediacy. And from this immediacy, action becomes more natural. You don't need as much motivation, because motivation is a concept that belongs to forcing. When action arises from resonance, you don't need to psych yourself up. You move because something makes sense to move toward. You rest because resting makes sense. You stop when stopping makes sense. There's less inner negotiation, which reduces decision fatigue. Life becomes less about managing yourself, more about participating. This is a major pivot from self-management to self-trust. Not blind trust, not reckless trust. Felt trust. Trust born from repeated experiences of, I can meet what arises. I can feel discomfort without collapsing. I can adjust. I can recover. That's real trust. And as this trust stabilizes, another layer dissolves. The fear of losing it. People often worry, what if this state disappears? What if I fall back? What if I regress? That worry itself belongs to an earlier stage because it assumes the shift is a fragile state. But the shift isn't a state. It's a reorganization. You can't unsee certain things. You can't unknow how pressure feels compared to softness. You can still tighten. You can still overthink. You can still fall into old patterns temporarily. But they feel different now. They feel optional. They feel heavier. They don't feel like home, which means you naturally return. Not through discipline, through discomfort with contraction. This is important because it means you don't have to guard this shift. You don't have to protect it. Protection implies fragility. This isn't fragile. It's resilient. It's based on nervous system learning. And nervous system learning is sticky, which brings us to the next movement. Because once this stabilizes, a final layer begins to reveal itself. Not as a grand realization, but as a quiet truth. At some point, you stopped thinking about the shift, not because it disappeared, not because you lost it, but because it stopped being the center of your attention. It became background. Like breathing. You don't walk around saying, I am breathing correctly. You just breathe. The same thing begins to happen with your inner state. You're not checking if you're regulated, not checking if you're aligned, not scanning for signs. You're living. And this is one of the most reliable signs that the shift has integrated. When you stop measuring it. Before, you were oriented toward an internal project, becoming calmer, becoming clearer, becoming healed. Now, life itself becomes the orientation, not in a dramatic way, in a simple way. You wake up, you move through your day, you respond, you rest, you engage, you disengage. There's no constant meta-commentary about how well you're doing. That commentary used to feel necessary, responsible. Now it feels unnecessary, even slightly exhausting. This is important because many people assume the end of seeking will feel like a permanent high. It doesn't. It feels ordinary, very ordinary, and that ordinariness can feel anticlimactic. But anticlimactic is not negative. Anticlimactic means nothing needs to be propped up, nothing needs to be sustained, nothing needs to be maintained. You're not holding a state. You're not guarding a realization. You're simply functioning from a quieter baseline. This is why people sometimes say, I don't feel spiritual anymore. What they often mean is, I don't feel special anymore. But the shift was never meant to make you feel special. It was meant to make you feel unburdened. Specialness belongs to egoic contrast, better than before, above average, more evolved. Those comparisons dissolve, not because you reject them, because they stop feeling relevant. You don't need to place yourself on a scale anymore, which leads to another quiet change. You become less interested in proving anything. Not proving growth, not proving understanding, not proving worth, not even proving kindness. You still care, but you don't perform caring. You still learn, but you don't perform learning. You still evolve, but you don't announce evolution. This isn't humility as an identity. It's simplicity. Performance fades when there's nothing to defend. And what were you defending before? A fragile sense of okayness. Now, okayness is not fragile, it's baseline, which means criticism lands differently, praise lands differently, success lands differently, failure lands differently. None of these define you in the same way. They become experiences, not verdicts, not identity labels. You can enjoy success without gripping it. You can feel disappointment without collapsing into shame. You can hear feedback without turning it into self-condemnation. This is emotional maturity, not as a personality trait, as a nervous system state. And because of this, your relationships begin to shift, not necessarily outwardly at first, but inwardly. You're less reactive, less defensive, less quick to assume meaning. Someone says something sharp. You feel it, but you don't immediately construct a story about what it means about you. You pause. Sometimes you respond. Sometimes you don't. That pause prevents escalation. And when escalation decreases, many conflicts dissolve before they form. Not because you became passive, because you stopped feeding fire with fire. This also changes boundaries. Before, boundaries may have been rigid or confusing. Now, boundaries feel simpler. You notice when something feels off. You don't need to justify it with a long explanation. You adjust. You say no. You step back. You don't over-explain. Not because you're cold, because you're clear. Clarity doesn't argue. Clarity doesn't persuade, it simply moves. This clarity also affects how you relate to your past. Memories still exist, regrets may still arise, but they don't hook as deeply. Before, the past was used as evidence that you're flawed, broken, behind. Now, the past feels more like history, a sequence of adaptations, a record of how you learned to survive. You don't romanticize it, you don't demonize it, you understand it. And understanding removes moral charge. You stop asking, why am I like this? And start seeing, of course I adapted this way. Compassion becomes natural, not forced, not practiced, natural. Compassion for yourself, which then extends outward more easily, not as a virtue, as a recognition. Everyone is coping, everyone is managing sensations. Everyone is doing the best they can with their level of awareness and safety. This doesn't mean you excuse harmful behavior. It means you stop personalizing everything. You stop assuming people are deliberately trying to harm you. You see patterns, wounds, defenses. This perspective reduces resentment. Not because you suppress resentment, because resentment requires a story of intentional attack. When that story weakens, resentment weakens. This frees up emotional energy, which then reveals something subtle. You start noticing beauty more. Not dramatic beauty, not cinematic moments, small beauty. Light through a window, a quiet room, a warm drink, a simple interaction. This isn't because life suddenly became beautiful. It's because you're no longer rushing past it internally. You're present enough to register. This presence also changes how you experience pleasure. Pleasure becomes cleaner, not spiked, not desperate, not compensatory. Before, pleasure often functioned as relief, a break from tension. Now, pleasure feels like enjoyment, not escape. This is a big difference. You don't need pleasure to numb something. You enjoy pleasure because it's pleasant, which also means you don't cling to it. You let it pass. The same with discomfort. You don't dramatize discomfort. You feel it. You let it move. This symmetry is regulation. You're not chasing highs. You're not fleeing lows. You're inhabiting the middle, which many spiritual traditions talk about, but rarely explain in nervous system language. The middle is not neutral in a dull sense. It's balanced, responsive, flexible, alive. This middle space is where real agency exists, not the kind of agency that forces outcomes. The kind that can choose how to meet experience, which leads to a realization that often surprises people. You don't feel finished. There's no sense of completion, no final chapter. And yet, you're not searching. Not because everything is perfect, but because the search itself fell away. The question, what's missing, no longer drives your life. Questions still appear. Curiosity still exists. But existential hunger is gone. And existential hunger was heavy. You didn't realize how heavy. Until it left. This hunger was never about answers. It was about safety. Now that safety is present, hunger dissolves. This doesn't make you apathetic. It makes you grounded. From groundedness, engagement becomes voluntary, not compulsive. You can pursue goals. You can build things. You can create. But you're not doing it to become okay. You're doing it because you're interested, because you enjoy the process, because it feels meaningful. Meaning is no longer extracted from achievement. Meaning arises from participation, which is a profound shift. Before, I matter if I succeed. Now, I matter because I exist. This isn't an affirmation, it's a felt truth. You don't repeat it, you don't convince yourself, you don't argue for it. It's implicit. And because it's implicit, it doesn't need defending, which is why the need to convince others of your worth fades. You don't fish for validation. You don't build identity around being seen. You still enjoy appreciation. You still enjoy recognition, but you're not starving for it. Starvation ended when safety arrived. This brings us to one of the deepest realizations of the shift. Nothing about you needed fixing, ever. There were adaptations, protective strategies, learned patterns, but no fundamental flaw, no broken core, no missing piece. You were responding intelligently to your environment. The shift didn't make you better. It removed the conditions that made you believe you were worse. This reframes everything. All the years of trying, all the techniques, all the searching. They weren't mistakes. They were part of the path. They led you to the exhaustion of effort. And exhaustion of effort is often what allows effort to drop. Not because someone told you to stop, because you couldn't carry it anymore. That collapse of striving is not failure, it's transition, which means you don't need to judge your past self. You don't need to regret the search. It brought you here. And here is not a destination. It's a way of being, a quieter way, a softer way, a more honest way. Which leads us into the final movement. Because there is one last layer to integrate. Not a technique, not a realization, a stance toward life itself, not as a conclusion, not as a final understanding, not as a permanent state. It settles as an orientation, a quiet way of meeting life. You stop approaching existence as a problem to solve. You stop relating to yourself as a project. You stop assuming something must be wrong if you feel uncomfortable. Discomfort becomes a sensation, not a diagnosis. Uncertainty becomes a condition of being alive, not a failure of control. You don't romanticize this. You don't label it. You don't turn it into an identity. You simply live from it. And this is what makes it stable, not effort, not vigilance, ordinariness. You wake up. Some days feel light, some days feel heavy, some days feel neutral. None of these mean much. They're weather, not destiny. You don't chase good days. You don't resist bad ones. You participate in the day that exists. This is maturity at the nervous system level. Not emotional suppression, not positivity, not stoicism, capacity. You can hold more without hardening. You can feel more without collapsing. You can experience more without narrating everything. Life stops feeling like something that is happening to you. It starts feeling like something that is happening with you, which is a subtle but profound difference. Before, you stood against life, trying to control it, trying to secure it, trying to shape it. Now, you stand inside it, responsive, available, present. This doesn't make you passive, it makes you accurate. You respond to what's actually happening, not to imagined futures, not to projected fears, not to inherited narratives. Accuracy is powerful, because accuracy wastes very little energy. And when energy stops being wasted, it naturally flows into what matters. Not because you forced it, because nothing is blocking it. This is the part many people misunderstand. They think letting go means doing nothing. Letting go doesn't remove action. It removes distortion. Action becomes cleaner, more precise, less compulsive. You still make decisions, you still take risks, you still change directions. But these movements are not fueled by desperation. They're fueled by clarity. Clarity doesn't shout, it doesn't rush, it doesn't dramatize. Clarity feels simple, almost boring. And boring is often confused with wrong, because we were conditioned to associate intensity with importance. But intensity is not importance. Intensity is activation. Regulation feels quieter, which is why it's often overlooked. Yet regulation is what allows real change, sustainable change that doesn't require constant maintenance. This is why you don't need to protect this shift. You don't need to hold on to it. You don't need to remember everything that was said. You don't need to integrate it perfectly. Your system already learned something. Once learning happens at the nervous system level, you don't forget. You can temporarily fall into old patterns. You can temporarily tighten. You can temporarily overthink, but you will notice sooner. You will feel the cost sooner, and you will return sooner. Not through discipline, through discomfort with contraction. This is the new compass. Not moral right and wrong, not spiritual success or failure. Felt coherence. When something feels coherent, you move toward it. When something feels incoherent, you naturally drift away. This drift is not conscious decision-making. It's embodied intelligence. The same intelligence that regulates breathing, that heals cuts, that digests food, that adjusts posture. You don't manage these processes. They happen. You don't supervise healing. You allow it. The same applies here, which brings us to a final and perhaps surprising truth. You were never meant to get rid of the mind. You were never meant to silence thoughts permanently. You were never meant to transcend humanity. You were meant to inhabit it without self-violence, without constant internal pressure, without chronic self-opposition. The mind is a tool, a beautiful one. It can imagine, plan, create, solve. But tools are not meant to run the household. They're meant to be used when appropriate and rested when not. Now the mind can rest, not because you force it, because it doesn't need to guard you anymore. This is what people mean when they talk about peace. Not an emotion, not a bliss state, the absence of internal war. No part of you is trying to annihilate another part. No part of you is constantly labeled as unacceptable. No part of you is under permanent surveillance. There is space, allowance, room to breathe. And from this space, life continues. You still grow, you still change, you still evolve. But not because you're broken, because you're alive. Growth becomes a natural unfolding, not a self-improvement campaign, which means there is no finish line, no final awakening, no ultimate arrival. There is only continued participation, with less resistance, with less armor, with less self-attack. This is not flashy. It will never trend as a dramatic story, but it is real, and real is quiet. So if you're sitting here right now, listening, and you don't feel radically different, that's okay. If you feel a little slower, a little more grounded, a little less tense, that's enough. If you feel nothing at all, that's also okay. This isn't about producing an experience, it's about recognizing one. Recognition happens in its own time, not on command, not on schedule. You don't need to force meaning out of this. You don't need to summarize it. You don't need to turn it into a belief. You don't need to do anything with it. Let it be. Let it land where it lands. Let it echo where it echoes, or let it pass. Nothing is required. This is not a message that demands action. It's an invitation to notice. Notice if there is even a fraction more space than before. Notice if there is even a fraction less urgency. Notice if you are breathing a little more easily. That's enough. You don't need to hold on to this state. You don't need to remember these words. You don't need to come back to this video. But if you do, it won't be to get something. It will be to rest. And rest is not something you earn. Rest is something you allow. So we don't end with a command. We don't end with a technique. We don't end with a promise. We end with a pause, a gentle pause. Nothing to fix, nothing to reach, nothing to become. Just this moment, as it is, and that is sufficient. If this space felt supportive, you may return. If it didn't, that's okay too. You don't owe anything to this experience. Thank you for being here. Not for listening perfectly, not for understanding everything, not for staying until the end. Simply for existing, simply for breathing, simply for being alive. That has always been enough. Silence. If this space supported you in any small way, if you felt a moment of calm, clarity, or recognition, you're welcome to subscribe, not as a habit, not out of pressure, but as a quiet signal to yourself that this kind of presence resonates. You can like the video if you feel called to. It simply helps this space reach others who may need a pause too. And if you'd like, you can leave a comment, not to perform, not to explain, just to mark that you were here. Thank you for spending this time with yourself. We'll meet again, gently.